righty. So we'll start with our psalm, which speaks to the passage that we're studying today too. So it's Psalm 146. Anybody wants to follow along? I'm just reading verses 1 through 9. This is the story that in John, we're doing John chapter 9 today, and which is the story in John of Jesus healing a blind man. All right, so Psalm 146. Praise the Lord, O my soul. I will praise the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God all my life long. Do not put your trust in princes, in mortals, in whom there is no help. When their breath departs, they return to the earth. On that very day, their plans perish. Happy are those whose help is in God, whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the strangers. He upholds the orphan and the widow, but the way of the wicked he brings to ruin. So the Lord opening our eyes is part of the
part sounded like a song that we sang.
May very well be.
We all moved over here. Yeah. Because you have cuties. So they can see us on the screen.
Thank God. That's the only thing I have.
No, the folks on Zoom were a little worried I was here by myself.
Yeah, they couldn't see us, so we moved over here.
She's holding court to the world.
They're like, wait, she's in there all by herself.
All right. Talked to Bud yesterday and had he's doing well. He's started the process of, it's all liquids, but taking in liquids, during the day a little bit, like chocolate milkshake. Bertie's over here trying to entertain us. So, anyhow, chocolate milkshakes, and so, but his regimen is he's still on the tube feeding.
Right. Yeah.
So, his, the timing of when he has to do everything is such. He wants to come to Sunday school, but he said the timing is such that, the morning there's a lot
To do.
to do that. He and Susan have to do. So anyhow, so he's got a few more weeks of all that, but he's progressing. So he is
like
getting
he's in
out.
good spirits.
Yeah, no,
Good.
he's getting out and going places. I mean, they went and bought a new computer. They took a friend out to lunch, so he's able to sit with other people.
Yeah.
I don't think I could do that.
No.
So, but he seems to be okay with good. So, yeah.
That's nice.
Okay. So John chapter 9. And so in this chapter, I want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff AJ Levine talks about in this book, and then we'll break up the story and talk about it. But I want y'all to think back to the opening of the book of John. All right, and what's one of the main images that come out of that?
In the beginning.
In the
Was the
beginning,
Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
right? Yeah.
Starts with a capstone.
That in later.
It does.
Yeah, it sort of summarizes who Christ is, and that he's been here from the beginning,
Right.
and that he is one and the same with God.
Yeah. All right. Is there any other imagery that comes to mind? In the Word. All right. So if we look at starting with verse 3, the second half, what was What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. So we have the word and the light, light and darkness, light and darkness. So there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. And then we come to the story of healing the blind man. So the imagery of the light. So, but the imagery of, where are some other places in the Bible that light and dark?
Book of Genesis.
Genesis.
Yeah, very much so in the birth story of Jesus. You know, images of light. Yeah, the Star of Bethlehem.
Yeah. So the power of that imagery of the light. And AJ talks about how, that imagery, that the darkness, the statement from, I think it's verse 4, that the darkness didn't overtake the light. There are multiple other places in John where Jesus refers to himself as the light, right? So in chapter 12, I have come as light into the world.
Chapter your light under a bushel.
Right, right. That's from this and not from Matthew, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Chapter 8 of John, I am the light of the world. So when we think of this light, are we talking about just physical light? No. The spiritual enlightenment as well. All right. And AJ talks about the distinction between light and dark, that the association with light usually is enlightenment, right? And dark, what are usually adjectives that we associate with dark or darkness?
Sometimes evil, sometimes ignorance, sometimes death.
Yeah. Isolation. Yeah. Fear, negativity, right? She talks about those metaphors and how sometimes that leads to assumptions about prejudices against darkness. Oh, the light has to be all good and the darkness all bad. And that's not necessarily the case.
Black-hearted, blackguard. I mean, it's all through the language.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's all through our language.
And it's interesting that in cultures around the world, the darker skinned you are, the more your people are prejudiced against you. Like, that's not just true in the US, it's true like in India, and it's true in Latin America. And so it is bizarre and in countries that aren't Christian. I mean, it's not just a Christian concept that light is good. It's in Hindu and Muslim countries as well. It's very weird.
It is. Yeah. And I had no concept of that until I was an adult.
Yeah.
And learned that within some parts of the Black community, if you were like going to a party, if you were darker than a brown paper bag, then you were shunned and not allowed into the party. That kind of thing.
I know
So
it's
it
a
is-
concern
so it is,
when
it's not
babies are
pervasive.
born. Is the baby dark or is the baby light?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Never ran across it,
Really, yeah.
even though we didn't have that many Black families in our neighborhood, but
Yeah.
I mean, the ones we did, didn't make any difference whether one was darker or lighter. So at least not anybody in our neighborhoods, our spheres,
Right.
our schools. So
One of our students did a bunch of, she's no longer a student, she's probably in her 30s, maybe even 40 by now, but she's done a lot of research on what's called colorism, and it's this, she's African American, but it's this concept even in the African American community that the lighter you are, the more attractive you are, or the less your people have prejudice against you, and the darker you are, the, you know,
Uh-huh.
they're kind of put down, even within their own African American community. There's this sense
Well, that's how
put
much
down.
of society
Yeah.
treat with, treated folks still do to some extent.
I have a good friend who's Indian, and we were talking about babies and, oh, blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, blonde hair, red hair. And I looked at her and I said, what do y'all talk about before the baby's born? Because all our children have jet black hair and dark brown eyes. And she says, the skin tone, light skin, dark skin.
If they intermarry with somebody else, then the child's gonna be different looking,
Right.
you know?
And in India, the caste system is predicated on the people who are darker. Like you have Indians who are every bit as dark as African Americans, and they are the untouchables. That's the lowest caste system. And then as you work your way up in the caste system, the lighter the skin. The Brahmins at the top of the food chain are lighter skinned. And so it's really fascinating across cultures that is something that exists.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. All right. But when are some times you can think of that darkness is good?
When you're trying to hide.
When you're sleeping, I like it to be dark when I'm sleeping. Right?
actually meditation. You clear your mind.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Daffodils need the darkness. You know, all the bulbs, all the plants need to rest underground over the winter.
Uh-huh.
The poinsettias have to be in darkness so that they turn red. from what I've
Mhm.
heard.
And we value the darkness so that we can see the stars. And there's so much light pollution from short pump now. It's getting harder and harder to see the Milky Way. You can see it at Mom's house because she's halfway to Charlottesville, but not as well here.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. 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 You know, and in the Old Testament, remember there was the story during the Exodus of the cloud of flame, the flaming cloud that they followed, and they could only see that at night.
I forgot the flaming cloud. I forget that. Well, I
did
missed
too.
that wonderful lesson.
Maybe someday we need to do the book of Exodus. And AJ makes the point about, that distinction between light and dark is really sort of a false distinction, that it's really a spectrum. When was the last time any of us, if we were in true total darkness or true total light, you can't really see in either one.
Yeah, we took a tour of Mammoth Cave many years ago, and it's about a 4-mile hike. Okay, and, with kids. And at one point, when you're in one of the big caverns, they turn off all the lights,
Oh, God.
and is it spooky? It is. I mean, you can't see anything.
Anything.
Wow.
Wow.
So it really is. So
That's sort of and then you know what it's like to be blind, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
You just,
that's
yeah.
that's it.
Wow.
That'd be totally blind.
You know, I don't think John, I mean, AJ, maybe because she's Jewish, seems to me like she's always on a superficial plane, never deep enough to understand what the New Testament was talking about. I do not think John was talking about daylight, candlelight, or anything else. And yet she goes down that path and kind of, I think, misleads. I mean, he's not talking about light in the sense of, sunshine or darkness. He's talking about, it's all spiritual things he's talking about. And it just seems like she so often is hung up with this light, dark, black, white. And it just seems like maybe it's because of she's Jewish by background, just can't quite get what the New Testament's saying, in my opinion.
I know a lot of Christian commentators that talk about the experience of light too, this physical experience of light. And, you know, the blind guy in the story, and there are multiple, it's the most common healing in the Gospels is Jesus healing people who are blind. In the Synoptic Gospels, there's 8 different stories or references to Jesus healing the blind. So,
But isn't that not about healing and the power of healing versus they're blind? I mean, he also healed lepers. He brought the dead back. I mean,
yeah,
you
no,
know.
I mean, he didn't heal others, no, but it is the most common kind of healing that he did. And you know, and Harold, I heard AJ talking more about how light and darkness is really, and I was going to say this about the spectrum of light and dark. You know, that if you're in total darkness or total light, you can't see. You know.
But again, it's about spiritual enlightenment. Spiritual. It has nothing to do with black or light. You know, I mean, it just seems like she's off base.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Yeah, she could have done a better job I'm with you, Harold. She could have probably done a better job if she talked about that range from all light to all dark, that spectrum,
yeah.
as being where every Christian is somewhere different on that spectrum. Where are you? That would have been a much better point for her to make.
And I thought she did make that point.
Oh.
So.
And I thought that she used the various examples to draw people in to get them thinking. And I think it functions at multiple levels. It doesn't have to be all theological or all practical. It's all of the above, in my opinion.
Yeah. That it's, you know, and we all, you know, we're a great case study about how we all interpret and view things a little bit differently and experience things differently. And so to have that spectrum of metaphors to help us sometimes just to remind us, you know, of the different meanings. So, you know, Jesus used a lot of different metaphors, and throughout the Bible, there's a lot of metaphors. So, a lot to help us understand this concept of God. I mean, the God as Father, to me, is a metaphor. You know, so to help us understand the depth and breadth of God's love. So, all right. So let's read. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say about this. We'll talk about this after we read it. So let's read first part of the story. All right, because there's the story of Jesus's healing, and then the Pharisees and their debate about. And you know, they in this passage you can clearly see they're not in agreement themselves, right? But I want to go back to chapter 5, to the healing of the paralyzed man in chapter 5. All right, because there are some similarities between that story and this story. First of all, there's a pool of water. Remember? All right. Also, in both situations, Jesus saw the person he was going to heal. It was like he went to that person. There's the Pharisees, and both of these stories are healings on the Sabbath. And remember, with the paralyzed guy at the pool, Jesus told him to pick up his mat and walk. And the Pharisees got all excited about Jesus telling this guy to do that work of picking up his mat and walking. And so, but here it's a little bit, the debate about Jesus' healing is a little bit different in this situation. So, so John, in his presentation of these stories, these pieces to remember, right? And I want to go back to the Samaritan woman at the well, right? And when she sort of started to get it as far as who Jesus was, what did she call Jesus? What did she say Jesus was? She said Jesus was a prophet.
Prophet, right, prophet.
She said that Jesus was a prophet. All right. So, since Sarah's not here, it's a toss up of who gets to. No, that's just Tom. Sarah's at the Abbey in Ferryville.
Oh, okay.
I can read it.
Okay.
How many verses do you want me to read?
If you would read 1 through, let's go ahead and read 1 through 17.
Chapter 17.
Oh, chapter 9.
Okay.
Chapter 9. John chapter 9.
As he went on his way, Jesus saw a man blind from his birth. The disciples put the question, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? Why was he born blind? It is not that this man or his parents sinned, Jesus answered. He was born blind so that God's power might be displayed in curing him. While daylight lasts, we must carry on the work of him who sent me. Night comes when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. With these words, he spat on the ground and made a paste with the spittle. He spread it on the man's eyes and said to him, Go and wash in the pool of Siloam. The name means sent. The man went away and washed, and when he returned, he could see. His neighbors and those who were accustomed to see him begging said, Is not this the man who used to sit and beg? Others said, Yes, this is the man. Others again said, No, but it is someone like him. The man himself said, I am the man. They asked him, How were your eyes opened? He replied, The man called Jesus made a paste and smeared my eyes with it and told me to go to Siloam and wash. I went and washed and gained my sight. Where is he? They asked. He answered, I do not know. The man who had been blind was brought before the Pharisees. As it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the paste and opened his eyes, the Pharisees now asked him by what means he had gained his sight. The man told them, He spread a paste on my eyes, then I washed, and now I can see. Some of the Pharisees said, This fellow is no man of God. He does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, How could such signs come from a sinful man? So they took different sides. Then they continued to question him. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He answered, He is a prophet.
Yeah. All right, so there's also another similarity between this story and the man who was the paralyzed man. And that, Jesus healed the paralyzed man, told him to get his mat, go walk. And Jesus just, Jesus goes, walks off.
Yeah.
And the Pharisees go to him like, well, who is it? The guy goes, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then Jesus sees the guy, goes up and speaks to him. And the guy then goes to the Pharisees and says, oh, it was Jesus. And so he rats on Jesus.
Yeah.
All right. So,
And this man presumably doesn't even know what Jesus looks like because he left to go to the pool.
Or he wouldn't have
So
seen
he wouldn't
it.
have seen, he knows it was a man called Jesus, but he doesn't know what he looks like.
right.
I think the light and dark at the beginning of this, what Cassie was reading is interesting because he talks about we need to get working, before it gets dark. And I'm the light of the world. Like when he leaves, the light is leaving, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Sabbath day or not. I'm here. We got work to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So several of you guys read the chapter. So a couple of things that AJ talked about that I wanted to bring up as well. So this whole concept about, the Pharisees asking, so was this guy blind because of somebody's sin? And because his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? So can you inherit sin from your parents? Can you inherit the punishment for sin? And AJ talks a fair amount about this and talks about, even within the Old Testament, the teachings are not, not the same. That there are places that it talks about, yes, you sin and so your punishment is this malady, all right, or your parents sinned and you're punished with it. But then there are also teachings like, no, that is not how it works. So there's not a consistent, I think it's an issue that humanity has struggled with to understand all along.
Well, we still have situations where, people who are abusing alcohol or hardcore drugs while they're pregnant, that can cause birth defects. And so it's not the child's fault, but if the parent weren't abusing alcohol and hardcore drugs, the children wouldn't inherit this birth defect. So there are still situations like that.
Right, but do we see?
We don't see it as, I don't think we see it as God's punishment on the child anymore. But we can say, well, you need to try to live a healthy life when you're pregnant anyway.
Right. I mean, there are repercussions to our sins.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly.
So do you feel like there's still what do you think that situation is in today's world? That sort of belief or philosophy in today's world? How do you guys see or hear folks talk about this concept in today's world?
I don't think people associate sin and sickness at all nowadays. Unless you're talking about, you're getting into the venereal diseases, then yeah, there might be a connection with that. But, if you have a birth defect or cancer or, diphtheria or whatever, if nobody looks at that as it's an act of God. You must have done something wrong to have deserved that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Otherwise, I mean, COVID, look at all the sinners that would,
Yeah,
the whole COVID thing. You can't do that. We don't think that way. We just don't think that way.
Yeah.
We just
I mean,
don't.
I think there's still a few people, I think I mentioned in class a couple weeks ago with one of the evangelical preachers, that may have been Oral Roberts or somebody I can't remember which one it was, but he said the reason the earthquake hit Haiti and so many people died was because they were sinful. And I can't remember which preacher said that, but it was one of
Pat Robertson. I
Was it
believe.
Pat Robertson? It might have been. Yeah, it might have been Pat Robertson. But I just remember thinking, wow, you still believe that.
You'd think Washington DC would be riddled with earthquakes.
Yeah,
Oh.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, there are a lot of people who said that HIV was
That's true.
a judgment on
That's true.
the homosexual community.
And some still do.
Yeah. But you know what, there's so much collateral damage with that. You can't say that venereal diseases are caused by sin because you have the babies that are born from mothers with syphilis and they did nothing.
Right.
They did nothing to deserve it. Or the people who are in what they think is a monogamous relationship or marriage, and all of a sudden they've got gonorrhea because they didn't realize their spouse was stepping out.
Right.
So there is a certain amount of cause and effect, but not everybody who
Yeah,
gets
not
it
everybody who gets
is
it.
the sinner.
Yeah.
What about the plagues?
Yeah.
Way back, when had all the frogs that, all that
Yeah,
with
in Egypt.
sinners, for what they
Right.
weren't true.
Yeah.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
For sinning.
Yeah.
I think today, I think we understand the science better, so we're.
Yeah, our
not as
scientific
likely-
understanding of the whole medicine world.
Mhm.
Laura, were you gonna say something?
Well, we've been through this long journey with our kid who has multiple genetic abnormalities. And it's interesting how nobody really wants to do the blood work to find out which side of the family they come from. Right? Because then you feel so responsible, but you don't want to feel even worse than you already feel. So, because if you find out it's only coming from your side, right? So, when I read the Old Testament thing about the sins of the fathers passed to the third and fourth and fifth generations, I do think about genetics and how things that they may have interpreted as sin were just genetic abnormalities. And those do travel down multiple generations before sometimes they peter out.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So I don't think she's this way because either Ken or I sin, not at all, but it does put a different flavor on the discussion. And also, it's a disabling condition. And so AJ gets into that later on.
You know, in my family, we have that BRCA2 gene mutation. I have it and my sister has it. And I have a relative in the next generation who they have some reproductive challenges. So they did the in vitro fertilization thing. And they basically did not select any of the eggs that had the BRCA2. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that would have screwed me and my sister. You know,
Yeah, you wouldn't
and
be
hey, I mean, I've got the mutation, but I'm damn glad to be here.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
speaking of one who was smoked, I'd rather be smoked than not.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
There's a lot of medical ethic.
It gets
ethical-
into a whole
Yeah.
different
Yeah,
world
it
with
does.
selective,
Yeah.
picking your child and qualities you want. And it's very,
Yeah. Very risky road.
yeah.
I
Are we
think.
supposed to do that? You
Yeah.
know, are we?
Well, I'm glad the technology wasn't around when I was coming along, when I was a zygote.
Yeah. You wouldn't be a
Oh,
zygote or anything else.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a whole different world. And is it really supposed to happen like that? Is that really what,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, how far do we go?
how
with
does,
this?
yeah.
Yeah.
Because a younger woman can just have a Down's baby, just as an older one as
Uh-huh.
well. You know,
Right.
it doesn't matter,
Right.
you know, and she could do everything right.
Uh-huh.
Not smoke, not drink, be
Right.
healthy, have a healthy weight, go to the doctor. It just happens.
Right.
You know, I've heard somewhere that there are fewer and fewer and fewer Downs babies because people are terminating pregnancy as soon as they find out about it. And I've always heard
Yeah.
from people who had Downs children that they were such a huge blessing and a joy.
Uh-huh.
And there's different stages of that
Right.
disorder.
Right.
They're very high functioning,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
just like autism. You have
Yeah.
profound autism where they don't speak.
Right.
You have to totally care for them. And then there's high functioning
Yeah.
individuals.
Well, it takes less faith to be a parent if you have all that science behind you and you can be selective. Where if you just have the faith that life is a bit of a crapshoot, so to speak.
Crapshoot.
Okay, and
Just have to deal with.
you just deal with it, and that you have the faith and you have the power given to you through prayer or whatever, and to deal with whatever comes. Versus, being selective. And it says this will be a whole lot easier. You don't have to think about this. You don't have to worry about that. I mean, and in today's world, there generally is less faith anyway. So anyway, one thought.
Well, what did Jesus say in that thing we just read about this child was born blind to prove my power?
Yeah.
Or to prove God's power?
So that you can come
Right.
down and prove it.
He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him.
Yes.
Yes.
So.
Right, because and I've thought about this a fair amount, that if the world was perfect, what would we do? What would we have to do?
I read an interesting article about exactly what you were talking about, Nancy. And it was about, I believe it was Denmark. It's been a year or two since I read it, but it was about Down's children. And in I believe it was Denmark, every woman who gets pregnant now, because they have socialized healthcare, is tested, and they're tested for all these potential disorders when they're pregnant. And the overwhelming majority of I think it was something like 90% of whatever country this was, we'll say Danes, said that they supported, they were not prejudiced against people with Down syndrome. They supported, having them, but also the overwhelming majority of them chose when they found out that they were carrying a baby who was genetically going to be Downs, they aborted. So that the end result is that there are fewer and fewer and fewer children with Down syndrome born in this country. and the author's question was, what does that do to our human capacity for empathy? Because if we're all perfect,
Right.
you know,
That's right.
what do we learn when we have people who aren't 100% perfect? What
Yeah,
do we learn?
but an arrogant person would say, well, I'm gonna learn anyway, I'll learn something else.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, and we're not having fewer and fewer children with Down. We're killing the ones that have Down, so there are fewer and fewer adults.
Yeah.
It's a difference.
And then you can pass on mental health disease to your child.
Right.
And people function really well with medications.
Right.
Keep them
Yeah.
stable mood.
Right.
How do you know you're gonna have, a child with mental bipolar, schizophrenia? I mean, do you
And I-
abort them?
Right.
Because the mother or the dad has mental, health issues.
Right.
I mean,
That's really
everybody
tricky.
has traits.
No, and that's what,
You know?
that's the issue in my family, on both sides of my family. There's a pretty strong history of schizophrenia
Right.
and depression, pretty strong.
Yeah.
And, so, yeah. And I worry that more and more folks sort of have this thinking, that, we can control the world. That we Nancy's sitting over here where you can see her face, her eyes are about this big, she's going, whoa.
Now, you think that until you have your first child. Then you realize you don't have a prayer.
It's before you have your first child, because I remember being pregnant with Sarah, looking down at my stomach and it was going, and I'm thinking, I have absolutely no control over it. She's not even born yet.
Yeah, that's when your life changes.
Right, it's like, it's easy for folks to think the weather forecasters can control the weather, and blame the weathermen when bad weather happens. Well, no, they don't. But yeah. And I saw I've been following the flooding and the disaster in Western North Carolina, and I have seen stuff that people have put on there saying that this was punishment.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I
This was
think there
punishment.
are people who
They
believe
still
that.
believe that.
Who
Yeah,
believe that.
Yeah. So,
Pentecostal.
So you guys are really talking about now we're talking about the real light and darkness.
Mhm.
It's the way you see the world. Are you in darkness? Are you in light?
right.
That's what John's talking about. I mean, the Pharisees were in complete darkness. Christ was in complete light. I mean, that's what John's after here.
And that disaster with all the flooding, it allowed a lot of people to get off their butts and contribute and do and help, and
It has.
it has.
It has. What Jesus said.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody deserves to have 30 inches of rain and, and have your entire house, your yard,
Right.
your property, literally your land, everything just wash away. I'm not saying that. But I agree with you. It's what people are doing. Yeah. I'm driving to North Carolina tomorrow to deliver quilts.
And
So-
I wonder these stories of healing that come up over and over and over again in the New Testament, whether they're blind men or lepers or whatever, whatever the healing is. Christ is showing us that he looks at a person like that, not as a sinner or as a less than or as an untouchable. He looks at that person as somebody with dignity who is deserving of God's love. And so that's the message I think we should be pulling from. We should try to pull from this.
Right.
That's the light. That's the light coming into the world.
Yeah.
God loves these people just as much with their disabilities, just as much as he loves anybody else sitting here.
Right. And AJ makes the point about how Judaism teaches, that these people who need help and assistance, that's part of our role. They play a very important role in society, And she makes that point that even this blind man was a beggar, but the beggars play an important role in society.
I have to say, of all the healing stories in the Bible, one of my favorite is the one who sneaks up behind him. I can just touch his robe, I'm good. Right,
Right.
and Jesus knew.
Yep. Who's touching me? Who's touching
Hey,
me?
who got the self-serve healing?
Right. Right. Okay. All right. So Harold, you're talking about how the Pharisees, but they were not all in agreement in this situation. It says some of the Pharisees were saying that Jesus is not from God. Not all of them, though. And they were divided. How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And so some of them are like, "Ooh, how can this happen? If he's a sinner, how can he be doing good work? This amazing stuff."
They'll use the P word, prophet, but they haven't made the jump to the M word, Messiah. It's like they can't even quite
Yeah.
imagine that at this
They
point.
don't think he is still.
Right.
You know.
This is, we have the benefit of over 2,000 years.
Yeah. But he's just beginning the ministry right here too. So I mean, but they would have no concept of Messiah at this point, but they have to understand that he is God incarnate, so to speak, first. Then
Right. A prophet is, who usually is able to do these amazing things. It's a prophet that's done healings in the past.
Foretell that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
You know,
Right, so
people
that's gonna
can't
be
put
the
2
first
plus
point
2
of it.
together. So trying to tell them that he's a Messiah that's going to die for their sins is way too early.
Right. And Jesus spends a lot of time teaching what the Messiah really is about too.
What instances do we have prophets actually healing? Because none are coming into my mind.
Didn't Harold?
I was thinking Elijah is.
I didn't hear. What was it? Question?
Prophets, stories of prophets. I made reference to prophets healing, but that was, and I think there were some. But of course, do I know those right off? No.
First thing here.
Would know.
Prophets healing?
Yeah.
I'm
turning
myself
Didn't-
back on.
Didn't the word prophet just mean teacher?
Well, yeah, they did, but they also did.
They're more like a
Either
seer.
Elijah or Elisha raised somebody
Yeah,
from the
seer.
dead.
They're predictors.
They're predictors, but Elijah or Elisha, one of the two of them, raised somebody from the dead. So.
My friend is leaving, I'm gonna ask.
Right, be sure I've got it right. So. All right, so how about, I've got to get ready for worship and wonder. So. All right, so let me ask you this question for us to end on, the food for thought perhaps. Why was this guy given sight when he didn't ask for it? He didn't ask Jesus to heal him.
Because God gives
He
us
didn't
what
ask
we need.
Jesus.
You answered that question.
He gives us what-
No, you just answered it, so that God could prove that Jesus could prove that he's God. He came here to do it. She just answered the question. I answered it.
Okay.
I think the answer is we don't know.
But we like to think we do.
Yeah,
There you go.
But let us have our moment of arrogance. We all need a moment of arrogance.
God knows exactly what we need, and that's what we get. Sometimes we like it, sometimes we may not.
Mhm.
Yeah, more the